Good evening, everyone. I'm Wendell Jones, and welcome to this special edition of our program on JCN as we look at the life and times of David Johnson, a former Director General of the Ministry of Tourism and a former General Manager of Bahamas Air. David Johnson was a consummate tourism professional. He was educated at Queen's College here in the Bahamas before going off to university. He joined the Ministry of Tourism in 1972 and served all over the United States of America, bringing visitors to our Bahamas. He served in Florida, in Boston, and in New York as Director of the Americas. And he later became Director General of Tourism. David Johnson passed away last week, and on our program this evening, you would hear from a number of his colleagues he worked with, including Subaltern Bethel, who was a Director General of Tourism. You'd also hear from Vincent Vanderpool Wallace. You'd hear from Joy Jubileau, Vernice Walking, all former Directors General of Tourism. On our program this evening, you would hear from Obie Wilchcombe, a former Minister of Tourism. We begin our program this evening with a tribute from his dear friend, Robert Sandy Sands, who worked with David for many years and was a roommate in college with David Johnson. Sandy Sands.
I am honored to pay tribute to my friend, David Johnson, a tourism professional, a mentor, a tourism icon, a person who served his country well for almost 40 years. Our paths first passed or crossed in May of 1972. David was then posted to Toronto, Canada as a young tourism professional by his manager, who happened to be my mother at the Ministry of Tourism at that time. And I, having received an award from the government of the Bahamas and the Nassau Beach Hotel, along with the help of the then Minister of Tourism, Sir Clement Maynard, was enrolled into Ryerson Polytechnical Institute in hotel school. David and I became roommates for 2 years, and there the friendship developed and matured from then. David unquestionably was one of the most qualified tourism professionals that the Bahamas had. His knowledge of the Americas in particular, and all segments of the tourism industry, has been unmatched today. And it speaks volumes of his rise from a junior ministry professional to that of Director General. He was also instrumental in helping the Grand Bahama tourism product, which under his leadership also flourished. David can be considered a vertically integrated professional with specific knowledge in tour operators, airlines, and the cruise business. There is no question that he played a pivotal role in the introduction of mass tourism and air charter business to the Bahamas, both in New Providence and in Grand Bahama Island. And certainly his time as General Manager of the Bahamas Air also confirms this position. David was a gentle giant, soft-spoken, articulate, humble, well-educated, and was a friend to all. His legacy as a tourism professional will live on for many years to come. He was a role model and mentor to many. I will miss my friend, and may he rest in peace.
David Johnson was one of the consummate professionals that I met at tourism when Perry Christie allowed me to serve as Minister of Tourism in 2002. I met David through Vincent Vanderpool Wallace because David was a part of the exercise to seek to privatize tourism in Grand Bahama. He'd gone with the Grand Bahama Promotion Board, and then when that process did not proceed, Vince Vanderpool Wallace wanted him to rejoin the Ministry of Tourism. It was a pleasure when he joined us because he brought with us the continuity that's required in the development of the tourism industry. He understood why he was among those chosen, among the first chosen, in fact, to be in offices abroad. And he was able to introduce us to many individuals who today are still in the industry. The continuity is fundamental because that is what causes tourism to work and the constant flow around the world. David brought a particular knowledge of airline business. He caused me to understand, more importantly, how the legacy carriers and the new low-fare carriers were creating this new dimension, particularly the low-fare carriers. And that's how we ended up with JetBlue. That's how come Spirit came here, because David discussed it with me, and subsequently Tyrone Sawyer would cause it to happen. But then David Johnson, when I rejoined the Ministry of Tourism in 2012, he wanted Grand Bahama to move. He had seen Grand Bahama as something special to him. Having been assigned from 1995, he wanted Grand Bahama to just move. And so he came to me with the discussion about the reef, which later became Memories, because he had developed a relationship with Stephen Hunter and Sunwing. And the concept was, how do we get rooms open? How do we cause for an increase in the inventory? And how do you get more people working? He led that charge with Subaltern Bethel, and they were able to cause it to happen in a record time. In less than 6-7 months, the property was open. Hundreds of Bahamians were working. We had new airlift coming from not only Canada, but from through the United States of America. New gates were opened because of Sunwing. David Johnson played a major role. And then, of course, he had this concept about the cruise business. His view was, why does a cruise business have to simply be you come in and you leave? Why not cruise in overnight and then leave? He became very instrumental in the celebration, applying to the waters of Grand Bahama and ensuring that the visitors who came on the vessel were overnighting at the hotel. So it gave the Grand Lucayan and other hotels in Grand Bahama a tremendous lift. The rates were lowered, but he was able to cause for more overnight business and also cause for more spend on the island. So he constantly talked about changes, the development, the technology, things that will cause tourism to grow and how more and more people will become involved. And then he created, in fact, I looked at it just over the weekend, he created a plan for Grand Bahama because he had this idea that Grand Bahama could, in fact, become the new Caribbean destination. He was happy and settled that he saw where this island would grow. He saw where Paradise Island, then the Cable Beach Strip, and then the point on Bay Street would cause for sustainability. He wanted to see the island of Grand Bahama move into that dimension for tourism sustainability. And that coupled with what was going on in Abaco, Exuma, Bimini, I think he was satisfied that we're moving in the right direction, because we always understood that whilst there was competition from all these other islands like Jamaica and Dominican Republic and Cuba, our challenge was the multiple islands, and how are we going to duplicate on the multiple islands all that was happening here in the capital. Well, we were able to do it, but there's still much more work to be done. But we're very pleased that the steps that we made were because of David Johnson, his long years in the Ministry of Tourism, his understanding of the business of tourism, and his true dedication to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
David Johnson has made a remarkable contribution to the tourism industry of the Bahamas, and indeed he has left a mark in the marketplace which will long be remembered. David Johnson was a part of a team of young Bahamians who were introduced to the tourism industry back in the 70s. The expectation was that they would be able ultimately to not only become key salespersons, but also to become managers of the Bahamas tourism offices, which at that time were all managed by non-Bahamians. As a part of that equation, which was led at the time by the then Prime Minister, Sir Lyndon Pindling, and the Minister of Tourism and Aviation, Sir Clement Maynard, I was also invited to join the team at the headquarters, and went to the Ministry of Tourism in 1977, where I met David Johnson and this team who were out in the marketplace. I became the Director General of Tourism in 1978 and had the opportunity to work with David Johnson, as well as with Vincent Vanderpool Wallace, who went with me from the Ministry of Education to the Ministry of Tourism, and Vernice Walking, and also in later years when I was a consultant in the area of investments, to work also with the current Director General of Tourism, Joy Jibrilu. So what we have over the years has been a team of bright young Bahamians who were given the opportunity to work in this these strategic positions for their country. Tourism has many aspects to it, but it has a most profound impact on the economy of the Bahamas, and that is on the majority of Bahamians who benefit both directly and indirectly from tourism. David Johnson was not only a good salesman, not only skilled in marketing, but he knew the product. He also had a great relationship with the airlines, as well as with the cruise lines. And so he became an all-around, well-rounded person in the field of tourism. You would have heard, of course, the former Minister of Tourism, the Honorable Obie Wilson, speak at length with regard to David and the various areas in which he was involved. But I would like just to speak briefly to David as a person who was strategically involved. I recall that in the middle of the 1980s, when we had the deregulation of the airline industry in the United States, and many of the charter companies then were going out of business, and so some of the lift to the Bahamas was threatened. David spearheaded the formation of the Bahamas Express in conjunction with Bahamas Air, which essentially drew traffic from the major markets of New York. And this service operated out of Newark into Nassau, and from time to time also into Freeport, and also had its impact on the Family Islands. Again, when we faced a situation in Grand Bahama where David spent quite a bit of his time in the latter part of his career, where the hotels were closing, they were affected by hurricanes, and we had a major situation in which we were in a quandary as to what might be done to save the tourism industry in Grand Bahama. It was in 2012, 2013 that we were able to work together on an initiative which involved both the owner of the Hutchison properties, the owner of the airport company, and Sunwing, a major tour operator airline operator, and also several brands of hotels which they operated, to find a multiple solution for the situation in Grand Bahama, which resulted in the opening of Memories and flights of Sunwing from some 8 cities in the US and several cities in Canada, which provided an injection into that industry and which saved the Grand Bahama tourism. Of course, unfortunately, we've had a reoccurrence, and that property today remains closed. And it will take someone like a David Johnson to work in the future to resuscitate the industry. So David was a strategic person in terms of meeting the particular needs and challenges of tourism during the different times in which they arose. In paying tribute to David, I'd also like to pay tribute to his wife and to his family, who sacrificed so much in that David was gone most of the time, away from his family, and without their sacrifice, we would not have had the success that David made in the field of tourism. And so, all in all, both from those of us who had the opportunity to work with David in various capacities, not only in the field of tourism, but in the other capacities in which David worked, we would like to say that he has done a great job for the Bahamas. His passing all too soon. We will miss him, but his work will endure for many years to come.
It's a privilege and honor to share a few of my thoughts and recollections of the late David Johnson, a tourism ambassador, and in fact an ambassador for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I had the privilege of meeting David in 2006, and our paths crossed oftentimes as I worked in the investment field and David worked in bringing investments to the Bahamas via tourism. At that time, it was evident that he loved negotiation. And when they talked about the art of negotiation, I think he's someone who was not only a student, but mastered it. And now I have the distinct honor, privilege of being his immediate successor in the role of Director General, having taken over the helm from him of tourism in 2014. I'll never forget David reaching out to me and saying, "Joy, if there's anything you ever need, don't hesitate, I'm just a phone call away." And he was always true to his word. And over the 2 years immediately after I became Director General, we worked on the same side of the team, as I would like to say, and then latterly, as he joined the private sector, I really then began to recognize what a skilled negotiator he was as we talked about various opportunities, and particularly for the island of Grand Bahama, whether it was an airlift, hotel development. Always with David, it was the desire to ensure that the growth and development of Grand Bahama, in particular, that their needs were looked after. One day I asked David, "Are you Grand Bahamian?" because of his passion for that particular island. And I'll never forget him saying, "No, I'm Androsian by birth, but Grand Bahama has my heart." And so I know the people in Grand Bahama are feeling particularly a keen sense of loss at his passing, knowing how much he did to drive business to that island, and his desire and his wish right up until the end for him to see great things happen once again for the Magic City. I also got to know David in a personal way. I think I say that with some degree of caution, because those who know David well know that he was private and rather reserved. But he shared with me on numerous occasions, and I guess many people would know, but I know particularly his great love in particular for golf, all things golf. He was an avid golfsman. And I would get to hear about his golfing holidays with his family, the holes that he played particularly well. And while not a golfer myself, I certainly got to enjoy the game through his eyes. But it was interesting to note that David loved all sport and could speak as knowledgeably about all things sport. He was also a true Bahamian nationalist, loved all things Bahamian, Bahamian food, music, and culture. And these are things that I've heard reverberated and reiterated from everyone as we reminisce about the life of David over the past few days. This is a particularly sad time for the Bahamas Ministry of Tourism, as we have lost 3 giants. And I'd like to mention Sammy Gardner, who just a few weeks ago was buried, and then David, and a few days later, James Catalan. And so it's time to pause and reflect on the contribution that they all made. All of them held leadership positions, David ultimately as the ultimate head of the Ministry of Tourism. And to say thank you. Thank you for the contributions, the sacrifices. Many people think that this is a glamorous job and often an easy job. I think those whose shoulders I stand upon, Subaltern Bethel, Vincent Vanderpool Wallace, Bernice Walking, could tell you firsthand, it's a lot of sacrifices, a lot of time away from your family as you travel to promote and market the Bahamas. And David, I just want to say thank you. I want to thank your family for all that you did right up to the end. Your emails, he was a prodigious writer and would write prolifically just to remind you of something, bring something to your attention. But all that you did to ensure that our #1 industry remained just that, #1. Thank you very much indeed. And we send deepest condolences to your wife Sabrina, your sons, your extended family, and may you rest in peace.
I've known David Johnson since 1979 when I joined the Bahamas Ministry of Tourism. At that time, David was part of a pretty small and elite group of individuals who were our overseas sales representatives. It was unusual for Bahamians to be abroad selling the Bahamas in that fashion. So David and the rest of the small sales team were part of that sort of vanguard group of Bahamians who are sales representatives, because prior to that, all of our sales reps had been foreigners. So for me, joining the Ministry of Tourism here in Nassau and understanding that there were other young Bahamians abroad working on behalf of the Ministry of Tourism, that was very exciting. So we both moved up through the organization, through all of the challenges. That was a time when there were so many global conditions that made it very challenging for us in the Bahamas to grow our tourism business. The oil recession of 1979, the Gulf War, the economic recession of the 1980s, difficult time when the government actually had to acquire hotels. And I can remember having conversations with David about what some of the things are that we ought to be doing to grow tourism in the Bahamas and to make sure that Bahamians were able to benefit from the industry. So we grew up together in the Ministry of Tourism, and we sort of moved in different directions, but always were connected because of our sort of shared passion for tourism. We were not unique in that, obviously, but David and I had a special connection because we were both, I think, connected in the sense that we had some shared interests. David always loved golf. We talked about golf quite a bit, even though I don't play golf. We always talked about golf. He enjoyed cooking. We always talked about what he was cooking next, whether it was soup or his fried turkey or whatever it was. And he had this really big laugh. For a relatively slender person, he had a really big laugh, and he always could cheer me up, and we would sit together many days, many evenings, trying to solve problems. And David really had a unique skill at negotiating. he was able to sit in a room with people and engage in tough negotiations and not make anybody feel as though they were losing. And that's a special skill that not a lot of people have, and I always admired that in David. So we spent a lot of time together trying to solve tourism's challenges. When I was promoted to Deputy Director General in 2001, David was also Deputy Director General, so we became really close colleagues at the same level in the organization, but again with different responsibilities. David had responsibility for the overseas operations, and I had responsibility for the Bahamas operations, if you will. And so we had to meet regularly to ensure that we were, invoking the same strategy to grow the business. Some events happened in 2001 with the World Trade Center bombings and whatnot, and we found ourselves having to really reinvent this industry, and that's when I think David really demonstrated a particular capacity to manage the industry with sensitivity. And shortly after that, he left and he went to Grand Bahama. He came back to the Ministry of Tourism. I became the Director General in 2005. He was my deputy, one of my deputies, and we worked extremely well together, had a great time together, solving problems. He was very problem focused, and so was I. We like to see solutions to problems and trying to find our way to those good outcomes. When I left the Ministry of Tourism in 2010 to join the Nassau Airport Development Company, and David replaced me as the Director General, we then became solid friends, and we would talk regularly and often, and we would talk about the state of the nation, and we would talk about what was going on in Gulf and what was going on with Tiger Woods, and when he was next going to do some fried turkey and those kinds of things. But it was really a way to stay connected, and David was that kind of person who was genuinely a good person, who always was willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. He never wanted to see anybody as irredeemable. He always felt as though people deserved a second chance, and that was one thing I valued in him, that he was willing to give people the benefit of the doubt even when I wasn't. And so he was able to convince me to see another perspective, to see that there's some good in everybody, and everybody deserved that second chance. He really went out on a limb for people who he believed had those qualities that were worth saving. And that's what I admired the most about David, his big heart, his willingness to push and to fight for those who he felt deserved another opportunity to be their best selves. And that doesn't come along very often, and that's what I admired most about him. And my last conversation with him was just a few weeks ago, and we talked about golf again, and we talked about how Tiger Woods seemed to be making a resurgence, and he was so excited about that. And so it was just those little things that mattered to him and gave us a real connection as human beings outside of the workplace. We worked extremely well together for all those years, but we also were connected as friends. And I will miss David because, as I said, he taught me something about myself in the sense that never assume that that what people show you is all that they have, that there is more to people than what they sometimes show. And that's a very important thing. And so I value that in him, his ability to embrace everybody and give them another chance. That's a true blessing. And I will miss our conversations and the talks about food, the talks about golf, and the talks about politics and people. And he was really an interesting person who really had opinions on a lot of things. Even though he didn't put himself out there, he He was, he was well read and very interested in people. So on that note, I guess I'll say goodbye to my friend, my former colleague, and I know that he's in a better place now. May he rest in eternal peace.
I have no idea when I first met David Johnson. It seems that I have always known him, and always known him very much in the tourism context. Needless to say, during the time that I spent in tourism at the Ministry of Tourism and outside the Ministry of Tourism, David was ever present and a most important part of what we were doing. I think many people don't understand tourism to the degree that we think the general public ought to understand it. But David was very much the backbone of tourism, and a lot of the work that gets done in order to facilitate things in terms of making sure that tour operators have our products at the right time, at the right place, and they're being promoted in the right way, making sure that reservation systems are up to date. So David did a lot of the heavy lifting in the background, and so many people see tourism as very much the glamour part with advertising and promotion, but David was the person who made it work in the background. And beyond that, he was just an amazing personality in the Ministry of Tourism. When somebody describes a Bahamian as sharp, what they generally mean is they're just super smart on some very specific items, and that was David. I mean, there were some areas where we never argued with David. What we simply did was ask his opinion, and then we moved on, because we knew that what he was providing in that particular area of his knowledge and expertise was something that you could hang your hat on. And he developed very deep, long-lasting relationships with some of our key partners all across the world. And that was so very important to us. Whenever we needed to get business done in a particular area and get something jump-started, we can always go to David and ask him on what it was that we needed to do in order to make sure we won the support of a particular operator. And the kind of relationship that he and I had was something that I'll certainly never forget. We spent a great deal of time together all over the place, and he just had some skill sets that are so unique that the one I remember the most is there is nobody in the world who could pull the right analogy for a particular situation like David. I loved to take him whenever we had some difficult negotiation, because David was going to be the guy that would shine a light on some particular aspect of it and win the day for us, because he could say and pull up the right kind of analogy to make everything become so much clearer in terms of concluding what it is we wanted to get done. In terms of time spent, in terms of hours spent, in terms of travel, there was no equal. David was as dedicated as you can get. I don't know a time I ever asked David whether he had finished something at a deadline time promise. He was either on deadline or ahead of time, and so that was always so special. Beyond that, I remember I used to infuriate him because I used to think of myself as something of an athlete, and so was David. And never mind that very slight frame, he was a phenomenal athlete. I remember many times he would try and get me to come and play golf with him, and I used to infuriate him by saying, you know, David, I don't play golf. I watch you play golf, and when your game gets up to mine, I'll start playing golf. And he says, come on down and play. But I knew better. I saw him play. I heard about his game from other people, and then he also won some Caribbean golf championship. I knew there was no way in the world I could ever beat David playing golf, so why try? And so I just kind of moved on. And in addition to that, in terms of his dedication and time that he spent certainly with his kids, he was uncompromising in terms of he has to go and have a meeting with his family someplace. When he said, I have to go, that was over. There was no amount of work, no matter what it was, that was going to overcome that. And so in that regard, he was just extremely, extremely special. The one thing that's become very clear to me on the passing of David, and you know, the way I heard about it was something that I'll never forget. He and I spoke often in the last several months, many times a week. And every now and then I would call him and his son would answer the phone, and he would tell me his condition and how he was going. And last week, Tuesday, I got a phone call saying that David had passed. And I was sitting there staring at the wall for I don't know how long, and then there was a call coming on my phone showing David calling me on WhatsApp. Of course, it was his son calling me. It was one of these extraordinary moments that I will always, always remember. And I held it together up to that point, but then after that, it was very difficult to hold on, because what we now have come to recognize is there is something called the tourism family. There are a number of people who have done extraordinary work on behalf of the people in the Bahamas and who work in the Ministry of Tourism. There are people from all over the world calling me and sending me text messages, sending condolences for my loss. I'm not directly related to David, but people saw him as part of our family, and so they understand that the loss is a loss for everybody associated with tourism. So, farewell, my friend. We will continue to pray for you and your family. May your soul rest in peace.
Tourism as a tool for economic development and a business moves on the basis of development, that is, capacity. The Bahamas recognized in recent times that we've been flat. We were a leader in the tourism sector in the Caribbean. We were at something like 12,000 rooms for accommodation for visitors in the early 70s, 71, 72, and over 1 million visitors arriving by air. At that time, places like Cancun, Dominican Republic, Jamaica were less than 1/2 our size. Over the next 30 years, we've seen those destinations increase their capacity to more than double, if not triple ours, and by extension, their business, their tourism count. That was fine when we didn't have a need to grow. But we know in the Bahamas now, our population is moving. We cannot live with a static industry. So the purpose of this corporation, somewhat similar to when the Hotel Corporation came into effect, is for the government to use some of the resources to, in a strategic way and tactical way, cause for tourism to grow, to master plan it, to ensure it happens where it needs to happen, and to have competitive tourism products. So this corporation and my charge is to focus on how do we develop a more competitive tourism product so that marketing works.
Between 1964 and, say, the early 70s, tourism in the Bahamas grew exponentially. You would say that?
Oh, no question about it. Unlike any other destination, we started modern tourism in the Caribbean, with the exception of Havana.
So, how did we begin, and what attracted tourists to the Bahamas? Was it the decline of Cuba in the late 50s? We are talking about 1964 now, when the Ministry of Tourism started.
Yeah, there were a combination of things. There's no question the opportunity was created largely by Cuba's demise. But tourism in the Caribbean really started with cruise tourism. And there were two destinations that led the pack. Cruises left Miami, Havana, Nassau, Miami. We were twinned with Cuba from the outset. But when Cuba went through its revolution, a lot of U.S. investors, we want to call them that, looked at a nearby spot like the Bahamas. So that created Grand Bahama. That created Freeport and Lucaya, which exceeded Nassau in its early days. What we had then was a spirit, almost a pioneering spirit. And we had business persons at the helm, okay? The chap who founded modern tourism, he was a businessman, Stafford Sands. And he cut a deal. He cut deals to cause for the development of tourism in a very unbureaucratic manner. So it happened. There's a good part of that we must remember. Today, business moves lightning fast. There's no bureaucratic means of winning today. So we should not lose sight of the fact that this is a competitive business, and we need business acumen driving our thinking.
It's interesting that you said that because even though he was a businessman, he left in 1967 the Ministry of Tourism in January, but we still saw the increase in tourism throughout the years, up to the 1980s, you would say.
Yes, the Promotion of Tourism Act was an act of genius. It's very simple, but it was an enabler. And that hasn't changed today. That is what was created then. And it made the Ministry of Tourism, unlike any other agency of government, unique.
Yes.
In that the minister was empowered to do what is necessary without necessarily even referring to his colleagues to cause for tourism to grow.
So the Ministry of Tourism became a corporation unto itself, corporation soul.
Embodied in the minister.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And so successive ministers were able to use that vehicle to grow tourism as it did.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
What changed, of course, as tourism got bigger and the cabinet form of government took hold, ministers constrained themselves, perhaps more than they had to, by consultation. But the fact is, that act enabled the minister to act almost unilaterally in many areas in terms of once he has his budget, deploying that to get the results.
You, in the Ministry of Tourism, also had you developed a professional staff. And I'd like for you to speak to that. The quality of individuals that were needed for the marketing, the public relations of the Bahamas.
Yes, I was one among the early recruits. When I joined the Ministry of Tourism, we had a professional organization of hardcore professionals. They were all different, but they came from the private sector, from various airlines in the world, Pan Am, etc., etc. These were proven industry professionals. And we were trained by those persons and a program that Sir Clement Maynard inaugurated to test the ability of Bahamians to adopt and to be effective in sales and marketing abroad. It was an experiment. Even Sir Clement was not certain that that experiment would work.
So you couldn't run the Ministry of Tourism and get the yields that you got with a kind of civil service mentality?
No, I would say outright no. And when you say civil service mentality, when we talk about slow bureaucracy,
Right.
we would be dead in the water. No, it moves too quickly. And the process and the constraints would not enable us to convert.
Now, when we were developing tourism in the Bahamas, our neighbors in the south were into agricultural pursuits. They were able to run a race with us, and perhaps they ran a very good race looking at the successes of the Bahamas, eh?
Well, that's what they did, precisely. I mean, there was a time when they had this pride that service was servitude. However, they soon found that the realities of economics, of the crop they were trying to sell, they couldn't export them at profits. And they looked to tourism as a means of really fueling their economy. And once they saw that they could be competitive, they learned from the Bahamas, copied what we did, and deploy all the resources to catch up. And catch up they did. But even our competitors to the south of us, without exception, they look at the Bahamas as potential and say, if we had what the Bahamas had, our strength is we have so many islands, and we have not scratched the surface in a real sense of developing our true potential. So if we were stock, I would say to the world, buy the Bahamas stock. But the earning potential is far greater in the Bahamas than anywhere else.
Are we using that potential though? Because if you look at the Bahamas itself can be a region based on the number of islands that we have. And in terms of marketing tourism, we have only been pushing New Providence, Paradise Island, and Grand Bahama. Isn't that right?
Yes, and the reason we exist, one of the reasons I am where I am at, is because we have to move away from a master plan for tourism development that's driven by what investors' appetite might be. We should determine what are the objectives for the country, then go out and locate strategic partners that can help us do that, where and when we need it. That's what I do today.
So the paradigm, there's a paradigm shift.
It's shifting very quickly.
Okay. And back in the 60s and 70s, we were looking, we had a small population, a much smaller population, and the needs were not as they are today.
No, it was not so competitive. We had a captive audience. We just kept the shop open, and we didn't look for customers. They came. There were a few stores on the street. Today, we have them all around us, and we need to go and bring people into our stores and present products to them to sell. We really have to go out and market the destination. We said we were marketing before. We were servicing existing demand. Today, we have to stimulate demand.
And how do you do that?
It's about determining the opportunities. First of all, we have to know our product and its potential. We have to know what works for Mayaguana and who are the partners that can align themselves to a plan to develop tourism in Mayaguana where there's a fit, and look at how that business model can generate profit for the investor, returns for the community that is desirable returns, and cause it to happen. Inducement, incentives, or simply facilitating. But it's all about a plan. It starts with a plan.
What is the difference between the product that we have in the Bahamas, say, versus the product that you would find in Jamaica, St. Lucia, and other places such?
It varies. There are marketplaces where there's a preference, a strong preference to be in English-speaking destinations in the Caribbean. So when that happens, so where do we go? There's Bahamas, Jamaica, Bermuda's too cool. And so there are those dynamics where suppliers in the market would prefer and be more comfortable going to an English-speaking stable destination. There's sometimes a sense that I'm not sure about that Spanish arrangement. Two, there's proximity. If you're flying from Toronto to Barbados, it's about 7 hours, 6 hours. And you have 5 days, you don't want to do that. The Bahamas is 3 hours. So there's proximity, there's price, just the environment of the vacation. There are persons who come to the Bahamas and go to the outer islands and would not want to be on Paradise Island. It's a very different customer. There are many variations. The Bahamas brand and the Bahamas reputation today is still seen as up there compared to the others. The others are seen as lower. They might have more volume because they appeal to the middle and the lower end of the market, and they have lower price points. But in terms of the perception of the brand quality, the Bahamas still is perceived as high quality and first world.
The number of visitors, for instance, in the Dominican Republic, they have far more rooms than we have in the Bahamas. The product is different, you say?
Largely different. Dominican Republic, you're dealing largely with very large hotels, 1,000 rooms and more. Hotels that are a destination within themselves. The guest generally stays within the confines of the hotel. They come for a week or two. They come on wide-bodied aircraft, they're transferred by buses, and they are captive. That doesn't do for the economy what our form of tourism does. But they have huge volumes. They have close to 60,000 rooms. We have less than 14,500 rooms. They're in the neighborhood of 3.8 million visitors that stay over. We're around 1.5. But our yield is much higher, and our population enjoys still a much higher earning per capita than they do.
Is it because our the cost is higher in terms of the cost of the destination, cost of goods and services in the Bahamas being higher?
Yes, we are demanding a premium, much higher cost for our rooms. Our labor component is higher. Persons in the Dominican Republic, generally speaking, the average intake per week is probably less than $70. In the Bahamas, that's nearer to what it is per day. So we are a high-cost destination. Power cost is considerably higher, labor cost is higher, communication costs are higher. But we're still managing to demand that premium with our pricing. But that is a threat to our long-term sustainability, because as quality comes up, and they're looking at quality, then price becomes an issue. If your quality doesn't measure up, or someone is able to match your quality but at a 40% lower price point, you have a business challenge.
As a former Director General and the Chief Executive Officer now of the Tourism Development Corporation, describe the quality of our product.
Mixed, varied, and there's a great need for us to bring consistency and to lift the level of service up significantly, because we're existing at a point where we appeal to the customer who's most sophisticated due to our high price point. The Bahamas is expensive, we're not cheap. So for that reason alone, we have to have what we call 5-star service throughout most of the Bahamas. We are not there to the level we wish to be across the board. It is very good in some locations, but we have many subpar operations that we must begin to induce to upgrade.
And this is not only in hotels, but this is what it is throughout the industry.
The environment of the
industry-wide?
vacation. This is industry-wide, the environment of the vacation. When they walk out of the hotel, the type of service they get in the stores or restaurant as they move about. Just the, the destination needs to be manicured. We need to maintain. The grass needs to be freshly cut. Most of our visitors come from places where that's what they see in public places. We have a lot more that we must accomplish in terms of tightening up our maintenance, even in public places, because we're a first-class destination, but often customers come here and question the true quality. It must not be in a hotel. It must be destination-wide. And so that's our biggest challenge and our greatest opportunity, is we're a small country. We can move quickly, but quickly we must.
Have we taken a lot for granted in terms of developing our product or sustaining the product that we have developed?
You know, Randall, I think the challenge we have is we have a small tax base, and there's a limit to the resources. Many islands or many destinations we compete with have one airport to be concerned with, one landmass. This country is challenged. Our greatest advantage is our diversity, but our biggest challenge is the cost to maintain 20 airports. Every island, there's infrastructure requirement, roads, power, water. So we're replicating these things in so many times with a small population and small tax base. So it means really we need even a greater amount of time. I'm so happy to hear the government announce a national development plan, because we lacked the planning. We should have been there 20 years ago. We're paying the price of absence of or poor planning, because we need to sequence this. There's no point in putting a $20 million airport on one island and then fixing the road on another island, and the airport with a $20 million airport doesn't have roads or power. So we need to look at what it takes and, again, properly plan the economic development. Yes, it might be that some of our nationals have to move. We can't do it all at one time in every island. So we need to sequence and say the greatest opportunities, the highest returns, and then blend that in with a social philosophy that our people understand, that they can see what the government is trying to do, and they know that their turn might be in 2 years while this is getting put in place. But I think we are getting there with at least a focus on planning at a national level and involving all the stakeholders in the country. That's a great start.
Let's focus on Nassau, New Providence. Let's talk about what it used to be, what it is now. It used to be a quaint little city, a lot of colonial buildings. The attractions were many for visitors. The quality of goods that were offered in the stores were extremely high. There's been a deterioration on many fronts in terms of what we offer in terms of quality of goods, what we offer in terms of attractions. We've been in serious decline, David Johnson.
Yes, I think in Nassau, just focusing on Nassau, Nassau has transitioned from a quaint colonial historic town and a relatively quaint tourism destination and a capital city to the largest transient passenger cruise destination in the world. Over 4.5, almost 5 million cruise passengers. And what has happened is we have allowed that to more visibly drive Nassau. That is, persons here for 7 hours looking to get a quick hit, and we have arranged much of what you see within about 3 miles of our harbor feeds off that type of visitor. That's not sustainable. We need to generate the profit from cruise passengers, but we have to have a destination that even a cruise passenger coming to would say, wow, I want to come back here and stay longer.
I'm here today to remember David Johnson. In my capacity as Minister of Tourism and Aviation for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, I'm deeply saddened by his loss. David Johnson was a captain in the business of tourism. He commenced his employment in 1972, and his life spanned many, many years working in the tourism industry of the Bahamas. He worked for the Ministry of Tourism in the United States in many, many cities, and then he came home and achieved the highest rank in the Ministry of Tourism, Director General, where he served in an exemplary manner and with distinction. So it is very, very sad today to learn of his passing, and may I join with his family in extending my heartfelt condolences on behalf of myself and the entire staff of the Ministry of Tourism to his family. His legacy is enormous. His example, his hard work, his dedication to the business of tourism, our number one industry, is exceptional. And his memory will always live in the Ministry of Tourism. And on behalf of the people and all of us that work at the Ministry of Tourism today, I bid him farewell and I extend condolences to his family. Thank you.
Thank you for watching and listening to this special tribute to the life and times of David Johnson, a former Director General of Tourism. You heard from many of his colleagues, and a grateful nation salutes David Johnson for the contribution that he made to the development of the tourism industry of the Bahamas. I'm Wendell Jones. Good evening.